AI, or artificial intelligence, is a hot topic not only in higher education, but education in general, and even other businesses. How does AI impact us? What is an instructor's responsibility to ensuring that AI is used ethically? And how, as instructors, can we use AI to better our classrooms? Join us as we talk with Dr. Julie McCown, Associate Professor of English, about her research into AI and her plans to implement it in her curriculum. Julie, thank you for taking some additional time with me today to talk about artificial intelligence, or as we often refer to it as AI, and higher education. I know you've done a lot of research. I know you've been investigating it and looking at it. I've sat through your ChatGPT friend or foe session that you did last January, and followed your comments on Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that too. So I guess one question I really have is, for those that are still unsure of what AI is, or what it, we often I hear so many people say, well, AI is ChatGPT, but it's so much more. What is AI?
So AI, artificial intelligence, it's a very broad umbrella term, and sort of the latest round of sort of fascination with the topic. It's more looking at generative AI. Specifically, ChatGPT is one of several large language models, or LLMs. And I love that it's almost ChatGPT has kind of become the Kleenex of large language models. Like, when you're talking about Kleenex, you use the brand name, but it's like all facial tissues. And so I've seen a lot of people refer to ChatGPT when really there's ChatGPT, there's Bing AI, there's Claude, there's a bunch of different large language models. So when you're talking about large language models specifically, that's a type of generative AI where you essentially have this program that has been trained on just a massive set of data, just more data, more language than one human could ever read in their lifetime has been fed into this program. And it's essentially like it operates kind of like predictive text on your phone, but just in a much more highly sophisticated way. So in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about when we say ChatGPT as shorthand.
I love that analogy of Kleenex versus the brand versus facial tissues.
Yeah.
I've never thought of it that way, but that's a great way to think about when people are saying ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's because ChatGPT was the first one that was released publicly where, everybody could go play with it, interact with it. So for some people, that was their first introduction to any kind of large language model.
Yeah, and it is fun to play with. It
is.
You get in there and you can ask it questions. Mm-hmm. We had it write a script for us. I was doing a video for my CrossFit gym, and I said, I want you to write a script using 1970s slang and language.
Oh, I love that.
and it wrote me like this script where it's like, okay, all you cool cats, and it was fun. And so it is really fun to get in there and play with and ask it to do different things. But one thing that has fascinated me about your experiences and your research into AI is the ideas that you have for using it in the classroom. Mm-hmm. How can you share with our listeners how you're planning to use AI in your classroom setting here in higher education?
My plans for utilizing AI in my classes, it's kind of an ever-evolving thing. Like last semester, in the spring semester, I kind of just let it sit there. I didn't have like a really strong policy in my classes or any policy, mainly because I needed time to wrap my head around it, figure out how I wanted to approach AI. And for me personally, I'm going to be approaching AI kind of more leaning into it, which I know that's not kind of a universal response that faculty have. And I think there's a range of different valid responses, reactions that faculty can take to AI in their teaching. But for me personally, I'm going to be leaning into it. We're going to be in my classes, I'm going to be giving students the option of using AI in, either writing their papers or generating ideas for their papers. We're going to be, reading articles and talking about it as a subject for discussion, because I think it's, there are important ethical issues surrounding AI, both in terms of education, but like data privacy also, that I think it's important to kind of temper the fun playfulness of interacting with AI with those more kind of more serious concerns that people need to be aware of. Not necessarily fear-mongering, but just be aware of that. But I am going to have a fairly, explicit AI use policy in my syllabus that kind of details what ethical, responsible use of artificial intelligence looks like in my class, so that it's very clear like what type of usage of it's okay and what's not, and what are the penalties if you're using it in a way that I don't think is ethical or responsible. Here are the penalties that will happen from that.
And I love that, because that took me back to when I was working in K-12, and bring your own device was the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted technology increase, but schools couldn't pay for all these new computers or laptops or whatever. So we said, okay, bring your phones, bring your laptops, bring your own devices, and then you can use them. And we had to have a long conversation with our students about what's appropriate, what's not, what's ethical, what's not, in that setting. So I think this is just a continuation of every time a new technology comes out, we have to have that conversation of what's appropriate and what's not.
Mm-hmm. And it's a conversation, and it's not something that's going to be a settled or finished conversation for quite a while. Because, this happened just so recently that, I think everyone is still scrambling to figure out like what are the best practices, and what are the best practices in fall 2023 may not be the best practices a year from now, or even, a semester from now. And so I think there's, you have to kind of have that flexibility and that openness to kind of continually shift and tinker your approach to AI.
Well, and I think it's so nuanced too. You brought up that we, all look at ChatGPT, but there are so many other tools that students are using that use AI. Mm-hmm. Grammarly is a great example of a tool that uses AI. There's also a research tool called Scholarly, where it will go through and read the articles for a professor who wants to summarize for a literature review or whatever for them. So, AI is being used in a lot of different ways. So there's so many little pieces to come right out and say AI should be banned. Mm-hmm. Well, what does that really mean when we talk about all those little nuanced pieces?
Yeah. And I think there's a whole range of responses to AI, but the one that I think the bad take, if you could label anyone as a bad take, is to ban AI. I think that's like the one thing where I'm like, that's both not a good approach, but also it's not really feasible. So anything beyond banning AI, it's varying degrees of positives and negatives to that approach. But I think at this point, like, banning it's not going to be a workable solution.
And I think you and I were talking before we started recording about how SUU is about to switch to a new similarity checking software. And you've experimented with that software a little bit because this is our first software that has AI detection. You can still get around that AI detection. You can still get false positives. Yeah. So I think it's important as we look at how are we using AI in the classroom, do our policies match what we're doing? Which always, there's always that question of, should SU have a policy on AI? Mm-hmm. And I know the communication department wrote a really nice syllabus statement that says some classes will allow, essentially, I'm going to paraphrase it here, but some classes are going to allow it. Some classes aren't. You, as a student, need to make sure you know. I guess it wasn't a syllabus statement. I guess it's more like a handbook statement. But basically that you need to know what's allowed in your class and what's not.
Yeah.
And to what extent is it allowed? You know, can you turn in a fully AI-created piece or not? But going back to us switching software, I think, can you share a little bit of what you've experienced as you've played around with our new software and
Yeah, so I've been kind of making it my mission to trick or fool the CopyLeaks AI detector, and I have had reasonable success doing that. It's a bit of a sort of trial and error thing, because I've had some things where it was, just first output that ChatGPT gave me that's entirely AI written that would slip past the detector and it would say this is 100% human. Then I had some paragraphs that it was like half AI, half my own writing. And some of those would get flagged, some of those wouldn't get flagged. But then also more recently with the release of Claude, the AI from Anthropic, CopyLeaks hasn't been trained on Claude. So pretty much anything that you get output from Claude, CopyLeaks says is human. But then I've also played around with trying to get false positives, and I did manage to get a false positive on CopyLeaks. I find it's particularly if you take really formulaic writing, like I would just take like syllabus statements, like that kind of policy language that
mission
sounds
statements, vision statements,
yeah, that sounds super formulaic. If you put that into CopyLeaks, it'll often return like, oh, this is AI, like very confidently, this is AI. And I'm like, no, that was human written. I wrote that. Very formulaic. Yeah, true. But it was human written. And from my experience, the way that I've been able to fool CopyLeaks, it really convinced me that it's not a good tool to use, both because it's just not going to stop the AI use. If like you're really wanting to root it out, a lot of students are going to get past it. But I think more troublingly for me is the possibility of falsely accusing a student of using AI. Because I've found research that suggests that English language learners are more likely to have their writing flagged as falsely being accused of AI than native speakers are. And I think it's also students who, are not super skilled or confident writers. If they are writing in very formulaic ways, that might be more likely to get triggered as or flagged as AI. And it's just that's not the kind of educator I want to be. That's not the kind of relationship of trust that I want to instill between myself and my students. So that's kind of been my experience, both just personally playing around with it and then thinking about what's that going to mean when students are using this.
Right. And I think one of the key points is with all the different types of software that CTI provides, whether that's proctoring software or similarity checking software, you have to go in and look at what it is it's flagging. You can't just take it at face value. And if it says, oh, this is AI or this is not, you still need to go in and look at the report that was created. Similar to the research you were talking about, we've found research that shows that proctoring software tends to be discriminatory against people that have glasses because it catches the reflection of the screen or whatever's behind them in their glasses, and so it flags it as someone else being in the room or something of that nature. And so I know that those companies are working on it, whether that's Examity or Proctory or whoever. They're all working towards improving that system, but we have to remember that it's still a system, and we can't just take that report at face value. As educators, we need to do our due diligence of looking at it and saying, is this something I need to talk to the student about or not?
Yeah. And I think kind of to that point, to have a better sense of like what AI generated content might look like, kind of going back to you talking about playing with it, I think it's important for faculty to play with these softwares, like to go into ChatGPT, go into Claude, go into Bing AI, and pretend you're a student and see what kind of output it generates based off your assignments. Because I found, particularly just specifically with ChatGPT, since that's the one I've worked with for the longest, you start to kind of pick up an ear for what GPT output sounds like. It's kind of like that thing of most professors, you can tell when a student might be plagiarizing a paper because all of a sudden it doesn't sound like student writing. So if you read enough AI output, you'll start to pick up that ear where all of a sudden you might kind of have that suspicion, this doesn't quite sound like how this student writes or how this student talks in class. Maybe I need to have a conversation with them about that.
Yeah. And I think something else, and maybe your department's doing this already, or even a small group is doing this, having faculty get together and share their experiences with each other of, so yeah, I played with AI in it. This is what I'm seeing, or this is the trend. These are the trends I'm seeing, so that we learn from each other what it is we're seeing.
Yeah, I think having the English department, we had a little bit of a discussion about AI and kind of sharing experiences last semester. And I know I'm really wanting to get a working group together in the English department where we can do just that, where we can meet on a semi-regular basis and kind of share, hey, this is what I'm finding. Here's how my students are using AI. Students found this new interesting hack that does this other thing that we now need to worry about. Because I think that's the key to this, is having those conversations and being willing to experiment and try different things and kind of being okay with that, not being totally in control or not knowing everything that's happening, and just we're all feeling through this together. And there's that need of it's gonna keep changing as you have more and more sophisticated, like right now the latest Chat GPT is GPT-4, but I'm sure in the coming years there'll be 5, 6, 7.
It's the new iPhone.
Yeah, and it's just going to keep scaling up. And so what we might say is a best practice, because it used to be back in spring semester, a best practice was, ChatGPT has only been trained on data through 2021. So if you ask it about stuff very recently, that's how you can GPT-proof your assignments. But with Bing AI being connected to the internet, that's no longer a hack. That's been very quickly shown, you can't rely on that as a way of avoiding AI in the classroom.
Now, I have heard that, and you can tell me if this is a myth or truth, from your experiences, that the more humanized or more personal the assignment, so reflections on, I use a lot of reflection in my courses. This is what we read. Now document, you have to cite what you read, but do you agree, disagree? What has been your experience with online learning assessments? Those kinds of things, to where it has to be more, this is what I'm saying. Do you find that the AI tools such as Bing and ChatGPT struggle with that kind of, or are they able to get around those kinds of assignments as well, from your experience?
From my experience, I think those kind of reflective assignments are good to encourage students to want to sort of have that intrinsic motivation to want to do the assignment themselves. And so they might be more meaningful to them, and so they want to tell you what they personally think. But in my experience, both ChatGPT, Bing AI, Claude, they can all give a facsimile of a reflective experience, because you can prompt all of these. You can give, ChatGPT, here's the reflective assignment I need to write. Write it as if you are me. And you can describe who you are. You can be I'm a 19-year-old college student in Cedar City, Utah. You can give it kind of a bio, and then it will write from that. Okay. So if a student is so inclined and they want to have ChatGPT make up a persona and write from it, they could.
But that's almost more work, isn't it? Because if I've got to tell ChatGPT or Claude this is who I am and this is where I'm from, and now I've got to train it on what I might sound like.
In some ways, it is a lot more work. And that's something that I've noticed when I've been playing around doing these kind of experiments with assignments with AI. a conclusion I keep drawing is this is really interesting, but this is taking me way more time or as much time if I just did it by myself. So I have very seldom found AI to be a time-saving hack. That being said, one of the first papers I had ChatGPT write for me was a literacy narrative, which is an assignment I teach in my English 1010 classes. And so it's like talking about your history, reading and writing, and your experiences throughout your life. So I had ChatGPT write that, and I was giving it kind of like, okay, give me a specific example for your childhood. Talk about a paper that you want. Like I was giving it all these details and sort of prompting it to tweak it. And, I realized I personally had way more fun writing that fake narrative with ChatGPT than I would ever have had writing it myself.
Right.
I don't know if that's just my weird personality and my kind of, why I'm just one of the reasons I'm so fascinated with this. But, you can give it personas and you can have it write from a persona that would closely match the student if they were so inclined. But it's probably not going to save you time. It'll probably take as much or more time than just doing it. So.
Yeah. Well, and I know that there are lots of positive uses for AI. It saves you time. John Lisenby and I were just at the UHESA meeting, the State Staff Association meeting, and we were having to rewrite the Constitution and bylaws. And John and I had a good time running our bylaws and Constitution through ChatGPT, saying, or I shouldn't say through AI.
Yeah.
Because I think John was
Were
using
you
something
doing
else.
the Band-Aid thing? We're just calling all AI
Yeah,
ChatGPT.
I know. But we were saying, can you make this less wordy? Can you get this more succinct? And it really helped as we were looking at the bylaws for UHESA. And when we went in the next morning, we're like, what if we just used this?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, yeah, that's so much more succinct than what we had. And so there are benefits to it.
Absolutely.
I laughed. I heard a professor joke about they can use it to write a reference letter for a student they didn't know really well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we have to also think about these benefits. What do you see as some of the strongest or most beneficial aspects of AI as we go forward?
I think one of the things, like specifically for higher ed, for students, is AI can really be a helpful, almost like co-writer, co-brainstormer. Because I know a lot of students, speaking from, teaching first-year writing classes, a lot of students are afraid of the blank page or the blank screen. They don't know how to start. They're kind of they have that fear of writer's block. And so, going to AI and ask like, oh, hey, what are some ways that I can start this? Or how do I go about researching this? It can give them a way of kind of getting over that initial hurdle or that initial hump of writer's block. I think it can also be like I've seen a lot of discussion about AI as being almost kind of a personalized tutor. Because one of the things AI is really excellent at is it's really excellent at coming up with ideas. Or like different examples of things. So if you're saying like, oh, well, I'm studying this particular topic or this like really dense critical theory, I'm not sure. You can ask AI, well, what are some examples of this particular theory in practice? And it can give you a bunch of ideas and it can explain things. And that's, I've seen a lot of people, you can have AI explain concepts, as if you were a 5-year-old and like, explain like the really dense concepts in a very simple way. And it's great at that. And so I think that can be a helpful way for students to reinforce what they've learned in class. Like if they, if what their professor said in a class, they're like, I kind of understand it, but I don't, then maybe AI could offer that little tweak of saying it in just the right words where it finally clicks in a student's head. So those are two things that just kind of pop out that I think, particularly for students, could be a helpful way of using AI.
Yeah, and that echoes. I was just reading. I got my newest issue of Harvard Business Review today, and it was talking about AI, and it was talking about divergent thinking. That AI can help us with that, help us brainstorm ideas, help us find holes in plans that we have or ideas that we have. Obviously, it's not going to everything about the situation. We can train it to an extent, but you can propose an idea to AI and say, here's my plan. What concerns should I have, or what benefits do you see? So I found that interesting. But yeah, it kind of echoes what you're just saying there. There are benefits to AI.
Yeah, but sort of at the same time, them saying, "Oh, there are these benefits." I think we also have to be aware. For me, one of the biggest sort of pitfalls that I think it's important to stress to students is AI's tendency to hallucinate or confabulate, which those are the two terms that you'll hear most often: hallucination and confabulation. Essentially, where AI is just making stuff up. So this is particularly concerning, like if you're having students write research papers or need to cite facts or figures. AI is great at coming up with really convincing, great sources, and like it'll give you a citation and it'll give you quotes from the sources and page numbers, and it sounds really amazing until you then go try to look up that source and you realize that source doesn't exist. So I think as much as we kind of hold up, like, look at all these amazing ways that AI can help us with our writing, help students kind of unlock their potential, we also have to be like, but you can't trust it wholesale. You have to, go in and monitor it. You have to double check that what it's telling you is verified. Like, that's going to kind of become part of critical AI literacy, I think, is, balancing that. It's great at ideas, but it also kind of lies. So you need to make sure you're not perpetuating those lies in your work.
Well, and that goes back to what you were talking about earlier about teaching your students what's ethical, what's appropriate. Mm-hmm. Going back and vetting that. I used to teach introduction to information systems, and we would talk about triangulating data from the internet. That you'd go onto a website, and I always use this one website that was like the Northwest Tree Octopus. A lot of K-12 teachers have probably heard it, some higher ed, but it was this whole website that was created around this idea that there's this octopus that lives in the tree up in the northwest of the United States. And we talked about how students would look at that and how can we help them vet that this animal does not exist. Mm-hmm. And I think what we're seeing is just that, again, that move to a new technology. Mm-hmm. And how do we teach students this is how AI can help you, but at the same time, what is your responsibility as a learner or a user of that technology? Yeah,
and I've not heard of the tree octopus example, but
if you Google it, it's great.
I'm going to have to.
Yeah.
But it makes me think of kind of the sort of evolving way that Wikipedia has been used in education. Like, it used to be when Wikipedia first came out, it was that, oh no, don't go near it, don't use it, it's not reliable, anybody can go in and change it, you can't trust anything it says. And slowly over the years, it's evolved to like, we tell our students like, oh, well, don't cite Wikipedia, but go down to the bottom where the sources are and go verify those sources. But then even now, today, Wikipedia is in some ways a lot more reliable than just the random tree octopus website off the internet. So I think, we'll probably see a similar shift in how we view AI to how we viewed Wikipedia, that it shifts and change both our approaches of how we use it, but then also, over the years, Wikipedia has become more reliable, more trusted, even though we still shouldn't trust it wholesale because anybody can go in and still change anything, but there's more safeguards and ways of preventing that misinformation on Wikipedia.
And then as I'm learning in my doctoral program, websites are nice to get ideas. Websites are nice to guide you to a different spot, but you really want to find something that either you can vet or someone else has already vetted through a peer review process or something like that. If you're, especially with a research paper or something of that nature.
Exactly.
So, yeah. By the way, the Northwest Tree Octopus can be lured out with money.
I love it.
It's a great site. But yeah, so as we kind of wrap up this discussion, and this is definitely going to be an ongoing discussion, not just here at SUU, but in higher ed in general, what are some final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners about AI and how it can be used in a classroom?
I think kind of maybe the first thing that I haven't touched on yet is with AI, like I do want to acknowledge that this is something that was kind of pushed on us without, like, we weren't warned that this was coming. We weren't asked, hey, is it okay if we, make this publicly available and kind of just open Pandora's box, so to speak? I do, like, as excited as I get about AI and as enthusiastic as I get, I know a lot of people are not as enthusiastic. They are concerned, they are worried, because it is going to necessitate a lot of changes, a lot of adjustments, a lot of tweaking. And I want to be mindful of that, this was kind of, we didn't have the ability to say no and opt out of this. We have to adjust, and especially like you're thinking coming on on the back end of a pandemic where we were forced to drastically change our pedagogy. We weren't asked, hey, this is like just when we thought we were coming up with a new normal, AI comes and we have to change a lot of stuff. So I do want to acknowledge that is going to be something that's stressful, that's frustrating, that's going to be something that, as I've kind of been mentioning, there's no easy answers. We're going to have to muddle through and make mistakes and experiment. So I do always want to acknowledge that if for those people who are like less enthusiastic about AI, it's like I get it, but I also kind of like to describe myself as being like defiantly optimistic about it, because I guess I don't want to be pessimistic about one more thing in higher ed. It's like I'm going to choose to be optimistic and think about the ways that this can do more, the ways that this can kind of help my students, help me, like make our jobs more exciting and more enriching. And that's also why I tend to shy away from things like detection software and trying to catch students out. It's that, I didn't get into higher education to be a cop and to
Right.
police how students are doing things. I got into higher education, into teaching, because I love teaching. I love, tapping in, like getting students excited about possibilities. And I think AI really is this kind of, since it is very much, generative AI is very much in its infancy, I think we really have the power to shape and push the conversation in really productive, generative ways that encourage us to use AI productively and in a positive way, rather than kind of see it as gloom and doom.
I think that's a great approach on it, and I think it is important to acknowledge that we do have faculty in higher education that this isn't something that's going to excite them.
Yeah,
it's going to be one more thing I've got to figure out.
Exactly.
And
they thought, oh, we're done. We're like the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm back to teaching. I'll do what I've been doing.
I don't have to Zoom my lessons anymore.
Exactly. And now then here's this other thing that they have to account for.
Yeah. And just acknowledging and having the conversations and getting people aware and familiar, not using Kleenex for everything, but starting to get better. I've got to be better at that because I think I'm pretty bad at using ChatGPT as AI.
But we're still learning all the terminology. Like
Right.
it's evolving.
Yeah, and it did just spring up on us.
Yeah.
I was at my parents' house and I started getting emails from faculty saying, "Is CTI going to do something?" I need to research what you're asking me about because I'm at my parents. So, so it is one of those things we're going to have to muddle through, like you said, but it's exciting to know we have someone on campus, and it's not just you. There are others that are very excited at exploring what AI could potentially do for higher education and how can we help our students, guide our students in an ethical and appropriate manner. So I appreciate you taking the time today. I look forward to your presentation at our Learning and Development event, and CTI is here to help. So if you need books for your groups, or if you want to branch out beyond the English department and include some other groups, let us know, and we'll get you set up with snacks or whatever you need. So
absolutely, I love that. I love geeking out over AI. Like this is just, I get so excited, and I can talk at length about it. It's been lovely talking to you.
Wonderful. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
As we've just heard, AI can be used for a lot of reasons, whether that's helping students create divergent thinking or just brainstorming ideas for a paper. Who knows? Maybe it can even be used to help you get an idea for a grant. Along those lines, join us in our next episode as we'll meet with SUU's Spark office and talk about how you as an instructor can reach out and get a grant to help do innovative things in your classrooms. Who knows? It might even include AI.